I'm ChosenArchitect, and this is Project Architect 2. Now today, it is episode 10, and that means it's World Download Day. So if you want to explore this world, be sure to check it out. If you're a supporter of any tier, you get access to it all handled all over on the Discord. You can find that link down in the description below, whether you're a supporter on Twitch, Patreon, here on YouTube, or through Discord. All of those ways definitely work, and you can be able to download this world and experiment and play in it just like I am. So thank you all so much for supporting, and of course, now on to today's episode. Now, last episode where I left off, we got ourselves a blind Energistics setup, and that is huge. We now have options for automation in the future, but I do want to explain a few things. So between then and now, I have updated the pack, and I have provided a ton of quality of life changes to this pack. For example, I added EMC values back to all of the project expansion stuff for the most part. So that means now EMC links have an EMC value. And yes, this should have been in here in the first place. I was kind of back and forth on the idea around this, but I think overall, this is going to be a good addition, allowing everyone to be able to start automating sooner with the EMC links. Now, with that change also came another change, and that was the way that the final star is going to be ultimately crafted. And so as of right now, I did change this recipe a little bit, and I made it essentially require more EMC in order to make it, which is good because the whole idea around this is to replace the power flowers with this EMC automation that I have set up for in-game. And so you can see right here, this does take quite a bit of EMC in order to make this colossal star, which will ultimately allow us to make the final star. So hopefully my idea here is going to play out well. My idea is that the creative items will help you be able to get more creative items, giving kind of more purpose to those items. So now with that out of the way, let's go ahead and get started with today's episode and what my plans are. Now, last episode I left off wanting to get the automation somewhat up and running for Applied Energistics. However, I think I'm going to have to hold off just a moment on that because we need to automate at least some basic resource production. And what I mean by that is I want to automate some raw resources just being smelted and converted into their ingot form. And so for right now, I'm going to do this inside of what I'm going to call the automation hole. Eventually, these are going to have designated areas for their automation, but right now, this is just the whole of automation. And now this process is going to be made a little bit easier now that we have EMC values on these. I can essentially now take them and I can learn these basics, and it will allow me to pull more out, given that I have enough EMC. Now, in order to do this, it is taking a huge toll on my EMC. Roughly half of my EMC that I had saved up is now consumed. So my goal here, at least to get the resources up and running before we can start working on anything else, is to have a central smelting location. It's going to be this right here. I'm going to get it powered just like this one. And the goal is that it's going to use power. However, we need to send the items to it. So the way we're going to define the items is through, I think, some pipes. And we have the ability to do round robin, which should, I think, allow us to pull these items out one by one. But I think it's going to be slow enough that this should hopefully pull everything out. But let's get 1, 2, 3, and 4 right here. And then we're going to have 4 over here. We're going to have 8 of them. I think I'm going to do all of these ores except for zinc for right now. And so that is going to end up going into this, in which I'm going to use a storage controller. And the way the storage controller works is it will connect to these limited barrels. And if we just have 8 right here, that should also limit the quantity of items that can go per slot. So if I open this up, I think we have to have items in here to see the actual quantity. But I know it's not a whole lot, definitely since we don't have these upgraded. So for right now, tapping in just like this should be one of the best solutions to this problem. And then making sure that we have a slot identified right here for each of these. So setting these up pretty straightforward, and getting the 10, I'm just going to place them in as the order that they show up in JEI. It's probably the simplest way for my brain to keep up with everything. And there we go. So we have all of the basics set up. Now for the actual items, we just need to right click them onto each container one by one. And that should allow us to start outputting from these. And that should be fantastic, right? So we have this set up. This is raw iron, copper, gold, and then we also have tin right here. And then we're going to move over here, and this is going to be lead, and then we have silver, and so on. Later on down the road, this will be definitely scaled up once we have a much more significant EMC production. So for right now, I'm going to run some cables into the back here and get this powered. This will connect in whenever I apply the factory augment to it. And there we go, factory augment ready to go. And we can see this should start producing. We just need to configure the sides. So for right now, we'll have input and output. And with it set up by default, it's automatically outputting those ingots into here. Now, something we can do, there is a way we can lock this. So functional storage, or sorry, not functional storage, sophisticated storage has a storage tool, which I believe we have stored right here. Very nice. And so what we can do is actually right click this or shift right click it, I think it's right click. So right click it and it's, oh wait, no, we have to change its mode, right? So holding down shift and scroll wheel, now it's set to locking and unlocking. So there we go. So now that's locked and now that's locked. Another way you could also lock the slots is by opening this up, and there's a memory setting right here, and you can hit select all slots to lock those as well. But it's good to know that the storage tool can actually lock these, much like the sophisticated storage ones. Now, interestingly enough, I'm noticing that this is not rotating, I think, through the individual ingots. It's kind of picking the exact same ones every time. Which is not good, not good. I might actually have to have two separate furnaces in order for this to work. Or you know what, because of that little delay that's there, I wonder if a barrel would work. This would allow a lot more items to go in. Oh no, it doesn't. You can see right here that it is basically just not allotting space. Okay. So yes, I am going to potentially need two smelters. Okay, so after making another furnace, yes, this is now working as intended. Okay, perfect. I'm actually going to move these cables back so that way I can place my calcite back in and keep things still looking pretty nice. Even though this is a fairly temporary solution, it kind of gives me an idea of what the future is going to look like. Now, the nice part about this little automation here is it's always going to keep this in stock. So we'll end up having 64 of these build up in here. And then of course there'll be a little bit of overflow, I believe. But for right now, this is pretty nice. This could smelt, I believe, up to 6 things at once, or 5 things at once. So we could have a couple more attached to this really, but 512 is great for right now. This keeps a nice little bit of buffer, and I can actually attach a controller or storage bus directly up to that, and we'll be able to see these. I just got to get the cable ran up under here and get it into this room. Now, the kind of cable that I want to run down here is going to be dense cable. So I'm going to run dense cable, which will allow me to carry 32 channels off of the bottom, for example, of this controller or the side of this controller. Now, you don't typically connect anything directly up to the dense cable because, like I said, the dense cable holds 32 channels. You can see that up in the top. But what we're going to do is we're going to branch off multiple branches of the regular cable, which can carry 8 channels. And so that's how you're going to kind of just in the kind of early game, kind of manipulate your channels around. So these can hold 8, which means you can have basically 4 branches of 8 channels hanging off of your dense cable. And the dense cable is just to kind of carry those 32 off of the side of a controller. Now, one of the primary reasons for these cables having EMC in the first place is to make it a whole lot less cumbersome in getting cables around, because that could be one of the biggest, in my opinion, biggest kind of struggles with Applied Energistics is simply crafting the cables, because they can get kind of expensive if you want to move anything around your base. So let's go ahead and get a storage bus attached to this. It's going to be pretty nice. So I am going to run the cables through here, and we're actually going to be able to see the power of facades as well. Notice, by the way, this is just a regular smart cable, and this will allow me to see how many channels are actively in use. I 100% recommend making the smart cables just so you can visualize this and see that information in Jade. Now, before I place the facades in, let's also make a network tool, and this is a pretty powerful thing as well. If you have anything facaded, it lets you see the facades. So for example, we have a cable here, and I know I'm going to be connecting a storage bus to it. So let's go ahead and do that. And then I've got to run a cable through it. Now I do want the cable to be visual here. That's fine. But remember, if we needed to track down where a cable was at, if we hold this, we can actually see through the facades, allowing us to kind of manage our network a little bit more. But on top of that, there's also a storage in here in the network tool, meaning whenever you open up an interface for upgrades, it puts it down here. And so you just shift click this and it will auto throw those upgrades inside. But anyways, back to this storage bus. I do want to set priorities on this. I think it's a good idea to make sure this is a high priority, so at least a 1, higher than our base storage, just to make sure that if we pull an item out and we put it back in quickly, it should go in here first instead of going into our storage disks. And also, by the way, the storage controller here, any barrels that are connected to it will be accessible via the storage bus. So we should see, for example, iron. Of course, it's really hard to see there, but let me think. Osmium, for example. Osmium, we have 700, but I'm pretty sure we had some in stock before. Now, back to the way these channels work, something that you're going to probably notice, which can be kind of confusing. You may see one device on this cable right here, but if you had another device that was a little bit on the, I don't know, the cable that was before this, for example, let's say you had a machine over here, or you had a device, an ME device that was over here. Well, this cable will still say 1, even though you have 2 devices. You have to kind of go to the start of your network, for example, up to the controller, to fully see how many, or up to your cable that is connected to your DINS, be able to see. You can see right here 1F32, but later on I'll be able to show a much better example of that. To fully see the amount of channels you are using per line, you definitely got to go to the root of your network. Now, another awesome use for these cable anchors is to divide cables. For example, I have a DINS cable here, but I want to run some DINS cable from here, and I want to run it down here and up. And so to be able to do this, I want to make sure this is actually disconnected from this DINS cable line. You can do this in a couple of different ways. You can use a different colored cable, or you can just simply place a cable anchor to divide this. Now keep in mind, all of the ME or the Fluix versions of the cables will connect to all colored cables. So don't use those to keep them separate, as that's not going to necessarily work. So I think now it's time for the fun part. I want to get automation fully set up for my inscribers. So I've gone ahead and crafted up quite a few of these inscribers. Essentially, we have 1 for each process, 1 for each of these presses, and then we have 4 for the finished products. So this allows us to do 4 at a time once we have enough of these pattern providers. Now, this means we need to get started with actually placing in our CPUs, which are going to allow us to do this in the first place. So let's go ahead and get that all set up. Now, I have my terminal right here. This is going to allow us to encode patterns here in the future, which is pretty darn cool. And I noticed we just got the network apprentice. We just hit 8 channels apparently somewhere total being used, which, yeah, definitely we have that over there, this, and we also hit 8 channels on this drive. Now, anyways, back to setting up the CPUs. So for now, I'm going to not probably fill this entire space, because for the crafting CPUs, we are going to need the CPU itself, which looks a little bit like this, right? So we need a co-processing unit, at least 1. I typically like to make 3 co-processing units per CPU, and I'm gonna kind of explain in the best way possible how these look, but I guess the guide might actually show this better. So notice you have yourself a storage, you need a crafting CPU and a storage. This right here is a functional, like, start auto crafting. And then you can also make these a bit wider and add a few more of the crafting CPUs and more storages, and so on and so forth as you continue to go. But kind of the only thing you need is just a storage and a CPU, and you should be good to go. And so that's kind of what I'm going to do. But what like I said, typically like to do is have at least 3 co-processing units on each of the CPUs, and I'll start to expand them as we go. I think for right now, I'm going to place these in here. Let's grab some cable. We just need regular smart cable that is going to connect up here to our DINS cable, and then that is going to run through here. Thankfully, these multi-blocks only use 1 channel. So if you place in a bunch of these crafting storages and you have a bunch of co-processing units, it doesn't matter so long as it is just 1 singular multi-block like this. That is just simply 1 single channel. Now I promise I'm going to come back to this and make this fit in here and look a lot better, but for now we just simply need to get the auto crafting up and running for these inscribers. So to do this, I kind of have an idea. I'm going to stack up these pattern providers just like so, 1 right on top of each other, just like this, and then I'm going to have the inscribers wrapped around this just like so. Now, you know what? I thought about having these right here in this room, but I think it's going to really clutter up the room. So why don't I put them here? That way I can eventually have 2 stacks of them right here in the center of the room. And this is going to look pretty darn cool, kind of looking like a server rack. So yeah, branching off that middle cable that I just ran over here, this is only going to use a few channels anyways. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So 5 channels just for the stack, and we'll have 5 channels over here as well. Now, a very important thing for this automation to work in this particular format here, each of these inscribers are going to need to be changed from the default here, which is like block auto export, into extraction side. So processed items will be auto exported through any of the extraction sides. And we can actually see that the back is an extraction side. The front is also an extraction side. These tops and bottoms should be input sides. So we shouldn't see the top and the bottom here sending items anywhere. And we can see that by opening this guide. And we can see right here that C, for example, is a bottom input, and A is also a top input. Now the back, which I believe is D, is an output right here, and so is the face, which is a B, I believe. Yeah, because the front is input and output. So that means with this setup here, we can send items into the front through the back. We can actually send items. This will send the items directly into this. And then whenever it is processed here, the extraction will end up going back to the output, just like you see here. And this is going to work perfectly. And with our crafting CPUs, it should allow the pattern provider to send multiple crafts into each of these inscribers. So long as we set our stack size, for example, I believe to stack to 1 or stack to 4, input slot stack size should be set, I believe, to 4. I thought it used to allow 1. We don't want 64, I believe, in the stack slots for these. Now I did go ahead and I made some more of these presses. The way that you can duplicate presses, by the way, is just by putting a block of iron in here, and that will then produce the press. So now I have enough, and I can start, for example, getting all of my presses in place. Now I think with these up and running, we should be able to now start auto crafting, kind of. At least crafting and auto crafting our circuits. So I guess without further ado, let's go ahead and do that. So right off the bat, we need to craft this. Now it's going to give the inscriber logic press in here, and we're going to go ahead and right click that. That way it gets removed, and it's just simply a gold ingot being turned into that. It'll automatically select processing depending on what you're actually working on. But this should be the recipe. We just got to remove that press from this. And outside of that, it should be fairly simple to set this up. So there's all 3 of those. Now, we also need to take a look at this recipe, which is going to be the finish processor, which means we also need this press, which is going to be silicon sent in, and that is one of our other presses. Now, the processing patterns are actually quite simple. This is just going to take those products and are going to be turned in. This is what's going to go into the bottom stack. And along with a couple of other recipes that require just regular processing inside of an inscriber. So now to get started, I just need to make sure that inside of the ME pattern provider, I am placing in the correct pattern that is in relation to the correct press. For example, right here, I just place that in, and that should be ready to go. Down here, I believe is our logic. So I just got to make sure we put our logic pattern in, and it's as simple as this. Same with the engineering. I believe that is the engineering one. And then that means the final one should be our calculation. And then last but not least, this is going to be our final 3 processors right here. Now, another thing that I think is going to help inside of these pattern providers is by putting this into blocking mode. So by doing this, it's going to check if there's already at least 1 ingredient inside of here for this pattern to work. And whenever it does see that that ingredient's there, it's going to make sure to send it to any of the other inscribers that are available that are connected to it. So making sure blocking mode is on is probably going to be a good idea for all of these recipes. And now with all of those set up, I can simply place in the rest of my inscribers. Now, without further ado, I guess we can go ahead and try to craft these. So I should be able to, for example, request calculations, and notice there's a plus here, and we see we currently have some in stock. I should be able to middle mouse click, and that's going to pull up the select amount and allow me to craft, for example, 10 of these. Now it is going to automatically select our crafting CPU out of the 3 that are available. We could go through here and automatically select them, but you can see each one of them are going to be the same. So if I go back, I'll just let it automatically select, and it should take all of these ingredients, and it should go ahead and send that process, for example, into here. And you can see there's multiple going on. And then it should also send these down here to be processed. And then last but not least, we should get the final required ingredients in here. and that should finish up the process, or at least so I hope. Now, here's an issue that I have had in the past, and it's actually happening right now. That is this bottom row right here. Unfortunately, these will automatically output to the bottom, even though it doesn't say it should be able to do that, it is. So what I've typically had to do is I've had to raise this up one and keep all of these separate from the final process. Now, you're probably just like me and you're like, man, I don't want to have to take all of these out and reconfigure this thing. Well, thankfully you don't, because Direwolf has made this beautiful tool that is called the Cut Paste gadget. So I can simply right click here and then shift right click up here, and that will select this area. And what I can do is absolutely magic. I can go ahead and I can hit cut, and it's going to take all of these blocks and store them. And what it allows me to do is paste this in, but instead I'm going to paste it in one block higher. So I'm going to anchor it right here. So where it is currently positioned, I should be able to, under paste mode, there we go. Make sure we're under paste. Make sure it's anchored. And then I'm going to go into settings menu, and I'm going to bring this up one extra. And now I should be able to right click this, and it's going to take all of those prior settings that we just had in place and all of the inscriptions, everything we had. It's going to all be saved and actually work. All of our modes and everything like that. Everything is kept, and just move it all up one. It's absolutely beautiful. Now, the only thing I'm going to need to do is place a cable right here to get all of these up and connected. And now we should be good. And of course, I will be able to use this as some sort of decoration area, potentially adding some lights. I don't know, some simply lights could look really good under here. These are slabs, but I'm thinking like the full blocks maybe. Now I have this stack here. The lights are looking pretty darn good. Over here, we can make the same setup later on, and we could also expand upon this by using the extended version as we continue into the future. So now let's give this a shot again. Let's go ahead and try and craft this up again. I'm going to instead do 20 and let that start, and that should take the pre-existing and should get those auto processed. And then we should now see that the only place for this to go is going to be back in. So our final processors are working. We just need to get some acceleration upgrades in here, and this is going to be fantastic. And by the way, we can see up here in our crafting status, this all actually working, and we can see that it is simply now waiting for the final 4 processors to finish up. And there we go, 20 of those processors crafted up. And like I had mentioned earlier, by the way, the acceleration cards, if you have them, you have them inside of your network tool, you can just shift right click and it just inserts them automatically. So nice. You may have also noticed, well, we're going to need some smelting recipes automated. And so I have my netherite furnace here. I have it set to auto input output from the top directly. And this is going to be great because what it allows us to do is anything we put inside of our pattern provider here should directly be inserted into the furnace, and then all of the products should be sent right back in to the pattern provider. And this is what makes Applied Energistics so nice, is it's just so simple to automate things. You just have to get this basic infrastructure up in order to be able to do this. So now that I have smelting, we essentially have the circuits now automated, and that is the biggest bottleneck for getting started with auto crafting. Now to show this off, all we have to do is convert Certus dust here and have it smelted up. It automatically knows it's a processing recipe, and voila, we are ready to go. Placing this in here, and we should be able to now request some, for example, 20 more. And it's just going to throw it in, immediately be done, send it back, and we now have automated smelting. So now we have smelting automated, we have our presses automated, but what about everything else that just gets crafted in a crafting table? Well, that is actually very easy to do as well, especially now that we have this basic thing done. It almost feels kind of backwards doing this before doing the crafting, but it will make crafting all of the multi-block structures that we're going to need much easier. And that's because we're going to need a few of these ME pattern providers and molecular assemblers. But thankfully, now that we have this, we can simply request, for example, more logic processors. And once we get our first little pattern provider set up and ready to go, well, from that point forward, we just simply craft more. Now for this, it is going to be a 2x2, and I'm actually now going to utilize this space for these crafters. I think I'm going to have one in each corner of this room, which is going to look pretty decent. And what I want is I want to start doing this. Now, I will say, as I've been told, this is not the most effective way of setting up auto crafting, but it is pretty darn compact, and I would prefer that sometimes over the other. right? So the way that you can make this a little bit more efficient is by basically surrounding all of your pattern provider faces with molecular assemblers. I'm not going to be doing that in this case. As you're going to see, this just keeps this a nice little rectangular 2x2 shape. And so we're going to have a pattern provider here. And that means adjacent to this, we are going to have molecular assemblers. And then we just keep swapping these out just like this until we have a total of 8 of these pattern providers. And 8 pattern providers are going to cover basically one extension cable off of a dense and is going to fulfill that one. So this whole multi-block will connect to each other and will count as a solid 8 channels. And so when it's done, it should look like this. Just like so. Now, like I said, I do want to have one in each corner here. And so now that I have my first one up, guess what? It makes auto crafting more of them so much simpler, because all I have to do is make sure that I have chosen a wood type. For example, oak, for example, might be the wood that we end up having in here. And we want to make sure that we have logs being turned into planks. So these are all just regular crafting recipes. And I just want to make sure that I get each one of these things set up. And that also means, for example, Fluix dust. This is another one of those operations, right, that is going to require one of these machines down here. Now I am going to probably end up getting myself an interface so I can access this. I'm going to show you how I'm actually going to do this. So for example, these pattern providers, you can actually access through a terminal like this. Now this wonderful little device is called an ME pattern access terminal, and it allows you to see all of your individual pattern providers and also see kind of what they're connected to. So for example, right here, these inscribers we can actually see, and along this line is going to be the full scale of that particular pattern provider. And here's our molecular assembler, so you can see what they're actually attached to. And then down here's our furnace. So this actually makes it very easy. For example, this new pattern right here, I know I need it to go in the processing one, so I just place it in here, and now we should be able to request processes down in these inscribers. So now with all of my patterns made for this and also making the molecular assembler, we should be ready to go. I just need to take this, and I also recommend underneath the molecular assembler section, placing in your crafts going down. And the reason being is because this one pattern slot right here is going to have access to these 4 individual assemblers. And so if I was to fill this whole thing with all of these patterns right here, that's going to be crafting one thing, well, we're going to run into an issue where it's going to have to wait until a process is finished inside the molecular assembler before it can move on to the next one. So to be most efficient with this, we want to make sure we place these going vertically, going down in a column. Now, like I said, none of this you absolutely have to do, but it is going to definitely make things a bit more efficient later on down the road. And now that I have this crafted and got all the patterns in, now we can actually request, for example, 8 of these. And all of the prior stuff should now be auto-crafted in order to make them. And there we go. There's 8 of those. And if I want 8 assemblers, there's 8 new assemblers. It's that simple. And the lovely part about all of this is now that I have the crafting set up, making a 64K crafting storage component and making 9 of them, which utilizes 64K storage parts, is going to be kind of simple. Notice I'm already running into a problem. And this is why we actually need those higher availability crafters. And it's for this very reason right here. I can't do it because I don't have enough bytes or storage available to hold the items for the craft. So maybe I can just, for right now, upgrade at least 1. So let's see how fast, for example, 1 of these storages craft up, and it should be relatively quick. Now, I don't have accelerators in any of that, but that was a 64K component it just crafted, and then crafted it down into this. But now that I have this 1, I might be able to, for example, place that there. And now this stack right here just got a bit better. So now I can go in and I can say, okay, let's craft 8 of them. And notice now I have enough storage. And so now 8 of those crafters are getting used now. Well, sorry, not used, but crafted. And all of that work, we can actually see this whole tree right here starting to work. And definitely putting in the work for sure. Now, I know all of this may seem kind of overwhelming, but it is going to lay the groundwork for future automations, making things so much easier on us when it comes to, for example, setting up a system that needs to be automated. It's nice to have it all set up within your primary storage. So now it's time for the fun part. I've gone ahead and I got all of this stuff set up to actually make these rooms a bit more functional. So I am going to be tearing down our current CPUs and actually setting up the ones that we're probably going to be using for a while, and the only thing we'll be doing to them is potentially upgrading their storage capacity. And so what's my plans for doing this? Well, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to have my craftings at the bottom, and at least these middle ones, I'm going to extend their capacity. And notice you can take these vertically, you can make them 2x2, a 3x3, what have you. But for right now, I'm just going to be going with 3 of the co-processing units. And at the very top, I'm going to put a storage monitor. The monitor is definitely not necessary, but each one of these is going to have a monitor so we can kind of visualize what is being crafted if we're ever in the room whenever we request a craft. And these other ones are just going to contain a 64K down here at the bottom. So this middle one, like I said, is going to have that extra 4K one. Same for this. That way we're utilizing it and not just letting it sit in a storage going to waste. And then each of these are going to get the 3, which allows the, which basically allows the pattern provider to use, by default, it uses 1 assembler. So by adding these coprocessors, it allows it to actually use 3 adjacent assemblers, if there was 3 around it, which in this case, for example, this one can access this assembler by default, then it would access this one and this one. So really, with this tree, it would only need 2, but 3 is good. And then to enclose this, I'm just going to fill it in with some of the quartz glass from the mod itself. And let's see, does that look pretty good? Yeah, that doesn't look half bad. And so you know what? With that, I'm going to have to bid you farewell. It's the end of today's episode, and I really hope you enjoyed and maybe learned something along the way, especially about applied energistics autocrafting. We're going to be diving a whole lot deeper into more of this whenever we start to dive deeper into this pack. There's so much to explore in this pack, and I can't wait to do it with you guys. And if you haven't clicked that subscribe button already, what are you doing? Definitely do that so you don't miss a future episode. There's still a lot more to come. This is just, like I said, setting the foundation. Also, get your world download if you haven't already. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, any supporter of any tier gets access to those over on the Discord. So join the Discord if you haven't already, discord.gg/ChosenArchitect, and join the amazing crew today. Also, I would recommend checking out my Twitch, twitch.tv/ChosenArchitect. You can find that link down in the description below as well. Give me a follow over there. I do stream roughly 3 to 4 days a week, and I would love to hang out with you over there as well. Thank you guys so very much. And with that being said, it's now time to thank the amazing supporter of today's episode. And that amazing thanks is going to go out to Chimera. Thank you so much for your amazing support by choosing to support me over on the Discord, by becoming a Discord premium member and supporting, and of course, one of the best ways possible. I thank you so very much, and I thank you guys all so very much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. And as always, yet again, can't say it enough. Goodness, thanks for watching. Bye.